Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we share insights about the future of agriculture. Each week, we dive into the stories, technology, and ideas shaping a sustainable and profitable future for farms and rural communities alike. I'm Paul Windemuller, host of the AgCulture Podcast, and today we're going back to the past. It's been a little over a year since we aired my interview that I did with Gabe Brown, and we got a lot of great feedback from it. People really enjoyed it. It did really well. A lot of people listened to it. So I decided I'm going to rerun this for the holiday season because, frankly, I'm going to do some more recording after the holidays. And I thought this would be a great way to fill that gap. But the other reason I wanted this interview that I did with Gabe Brown again is because I think it's an important conversation. And I really got a lot out of this conversation, got a lot out of talking to Gabe previous times as well. And really think the story of and the movement of regenerative agriculture is something to look at. Whatever your thoughts are on it, I think there are some great conversations that can be had, like this one that you're about to hear. So with that, we'll get right into the interview that I did about a year ago with Gabe Brown, world famous author, documentary star, entrepreneur, and farmer. Well, Gabe Brown, thank you so much for being here today on the AgCulture Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Great. Well, I want to jump right into it. A lot of people have probably read your book or have at least heard of it that listen to our podcast, your book, Dirt to Soil. That's quite an interesting thing for being a farmer in North Dakota near Bismarck, right? And going into becoming a published writer for a book that did really well. You want to tell us a little bit about that experience and what led you to wanting to write a book?
Well, first of all, I'm not an author. I never claimed to be. I guess as I became a bit known in the no-till, cover crop, regenerative ag space, I started to get a few publishers reach out to me wanting to know if I'd consider writing a book. And I told them, I don't have time to write a book. Well, anyway, I finally... One of those who reached out was Chelsea Green Publishing, and they offered an advance. They said, Gabe, how about this idea? We give you an advance, and then you can use that to hire a ghostwriter to help you write the book. And I said, maybe that's okay. And all they wanted to hear was my story. They didn't want the science of regen ag or anything. They just wanted my story. And I thought, okay. I knew a few authors who I thought would be good, and they had a suggestion, and they strongly encouraged me to sign a deal with the person that they were suggesting. I did, but unfortunately that failed miserably. And what that person came up with, I was not at all satisfied with, nor were they. And so the funny thing about the story is I had a deadline to meet, and I was on the road on the speaking circuit that time of the year, but I actually wrote that book in 6 weeks, from 10 at night to 4 in the morning for 6 weeks while I was traveling and speaking. And thank goodness I had a wonderful editor at Chelsea Green. She did a good job of taking my incoherent sentences and making them coherent, but the book, I thought, turned out okay. I guess it's done very well. It was number one selling book in soil science on Amazon for 61 straight months, and it's now published in 11 different languages. So I can't complain about that.
Well, I read that book first. I remember on a trip that I was going to Missouri, I read that book while I was traveling, and I really enjoyed it. I couldn't put it down, and I got a lot out of that book. But what do you think it's become so popular? What's the reason behind it that it really seemed to hit a chord?
I think it's number one, it's an easy read. Those who know me know I'm a simple man. I just tell it like it is. I'm not afraid to say what what I'm thinking. And I think most people can relate because all of us as farmers, ranchers, even gardeners have struggled at one time or another with trying to produce whatever it is we're growing or raising. And so I think it was a story that a lot of people could relate to in one way or another.
Okay. A couple of years after that, I believe it was, with a guest appearance in a movie, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, yeah, the book was released in 2018. And the documentary that you're referring to is called Common Ground. And Common Ground was actually, even though it was released in 2020, they started filming that in 2014 was the first time they were at my farm. And so they filmed a couple of times over that 6-year period on our ranch. Now, just this past year, the sequel to Common Ground, which is, just since in the past 2 years, the sequel to Kiss the Ground, which is called Common Ground, is being released now. And that's actually going to be streamed starting this fall. So, and Common Ground starts out the story on our ranch. So it's kind of following through, building on Kiss the Ground. I tell people Common Ground is very pointed. They're calling out some of the ills we're seeing in production agriculture today. And then it gives also some hope and some reasons for people to change and why they need to change and things we can do to change.
Okay. So you started out your career. I mean, that's kind of where you're at today. Some of the interesting projects you've been involved with, but you started out your career many years ago as new to farming, right?
That's right. I grew up in the city of Bismarck. I was very fortunate that when I was in the 9th grade, I took a vocational agriculture class, got involved with the Future Farmers of America. And I knew that's where I wanted my career to go. And so started working on farms while I was in high school. I actually started going to college to be a vocational agriculture instructor. I thought that was a way for me to be involved in agriculture. And then as fate would have it, I married a gal who I went to high school with. We started dating in college, and she was from a farm, and she tells everybody she married a city kid to get away from the farm. And then her parents called asking if we'd want to come back and take over the farm. I was enthusiastically saying yes. My wife, not so much. But we made that ranch a career of ours, grew the ranch, and now our son and his wife manage the ranch.
Yeah. So what took you from that stepping point of being a farmer to getting into consulting and doing things off the ranch?
Yeah, so the story on that is that my wife has two sisters, and we were invited by our parents to come back, take over the ranch. We spent about 8 years farming, ranching alongside them, thinking we'd be able to buy the entire ranch. Then all of a sudden, one day, her parents called the 3 daughters in and they said, okay, we're going to sell each daughter a third of our land. Well, that was a shock to us. And, fortunately, we get along well with her sisters. We're able to rent and lease that land from them still today. But that imposed on me, hey, I wasn't going to do that to either one of my children if they wanted to ranch. So our son, from when he was young, all he ever wanted to do was move cattle and raise livestock. And so I more or less forced him to go off to college just to get off the farm for a few years. He graduated in 4 years with 3 degrees in agriculture, telling me every night that, Dad, they're teaching me the wrong things. And we made the agreement with him that, Paul, if you move back to the ranch, but when you're 30, we'll turn it over to you. So we kept that promise. When he turned 30, we turned over management of the ranch to him. And okay, what's Gabe going to do at that time? I still felt fairly young. And so along with Dr. Alan Williams, Ray Archuleta, and the late David Brandt, we formed Understanding Ag. And Understanding Ag is a consulting company. We've grown the business. Today it's owned by Alan and myself. We have approximately between 25 and 30 people working for us. Consulting, we consult on over 34 million acres across North America, England, and Ireland. Besides that, we formed a nonprofit called Soil Health Academy, which you're familiar with. And Soil Health Academy's mission is to educate, because Alan and I and Ray and David knew early on that farmers and ranchers cannot implement what they do not know. And unfortunately, colleges, land-grant universities, extension, they're not teaching us these time-tested ecological principles. And so we wanted to have a conduit, a means, a way to educate farmers and ranchers. Now, since then, 2 years ago, we formed another company called Regenerative, because we were seeing there was a real lack of confidence from consumers as to what they're buying. We saw that farmers and ranchers were not being rewarded for all their efforts in conservation, biodiversity, in mitigating climate change, so to speak, by bringing more carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it back in the soil. So Regenerafied's goal is, how do we reward farmers and ranchers and then line them up with brands and supply chains that want to source these regeneratively grown and raised products. And then we give consumers that mark of confidence by verifying that what they're purchasing is truly regenerative. So that's a few of the things I do to keep somewhat busy nowadays.
Well, I give you props for taking that transition, because I've seen a lot of generational farms where the older generation doesn't seem to reinvent themselves very well or at all, and doesn't make room for that next generation to come and have their farm flourish for another generation. So good on you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's for sure. Unfortunately, I see that way too often in our consulting business. I'll give you one example. I had two brothers from South Dakota reach out to me, and they said, Gabe, we're finally going to be able to go down the regenerative path. And both of these individuals were in their early 30s. And they said, can you help us start down this regenerative path? I said, absolutely. Well, tell me what's spurring this on. Why do you want to go down this path? Well, Grandpa passed away. He was 93, and he made every decision up till the day he passed away. So realize that skipped an entire generation. These two boys, their father never had the chance even to manage that farm or ranch. And I thought, how sad is that? And I just wouldn't do that to my son. Do I agree with everything he's doing? Maybe not. But you know what? I made a heck of a lot of mistakes along the way. He can make a few also.
Yeah, we all do in farming, right?
That's right.
So you had mentioned that you're involved in operations not only in North America, but overseas as well. And I think we were probably in the UK or Ireland, I believe, a couple of months ago, roughly at the same time. When I had originally reached out to you, I saw you were over there as well. And I'd like to get your perspective, because I spent 6 weeks this spring traveling around the world, getting a really good perspective and handle on what's going on around the world in agriculture. And I know you get around a lot. So I really want to hear your perspective on some of the things that you're seeing. Is agriculture the same everywhere you go? Or what are some of the big differences that you've really seen in your travels?
I get that often, that, but Gabe, you don't understand. It's not like this here, that here, and we do things differently, and I call BS. It's all sand, silt, and clay held together by biotic glues. All the rest is management, or as I prefer to call it, stewardship. Yes, there's different crop species. Yes, there's different cover crop species. Yes, there's different livestock. there's different climate in terms of temperature, humidity, rainfall, etc. But it's all just sand, silt, and clay, biotic glues, and how do we make those 4 ecosystem processes function properly? And that's not rocket science. The 6 principles, 3 rules of adaptive stewardship drive those 4 ecosystem processes anywhere in the world. I tell people you can put me on any farm, any ranch, anywhere in the world, and I'm going to get it to work because I'll just follow nature's time-tested principles. It's not going to fail. Nature is always self-organizing, self-regulating, self-healing. Our problem is we want to get in the way.
What are some of the cultural differences that you've dealt with?
Well, one of them, like we saw that often in the UK and in Ireland, they have what they call hefting, where often referring to as sheep, especially, that they have to be born and raised in the same pasture, and you keep them in that. So over there, they call them paddocks, of course. You keep them in that same paddocks, that same general area all their life, And I'm like, okay, I can see keeping them pretty much on the same landscape, but not the same paddock. So oftentimes over there, you'll have, these are smaller farms, and you'll have 20 different paddocks with 20 different groups of ewes and their lambs grazing in them. And, we're thinking, man, just bunch them all up, put them in one, and you grow more forage. And yeah, so it's cultural differences like that, tradition, so to speak, which I really think, we can learn a lot of things from, our parents and grandparents, etc. But we have to be open to new ideas. Give you another example. Here in the U.S., I was given a presentation in Colorado, had a young guy come up to me and he said, "Gabe, I really liked your talk on diversity. How do I get my dad and granddad to get more diversity?" And I said, "Well, what are they doing?" "Well, Grandpa bought the farm in 1927, and we've never grown a crop other than winter wheat. It's been winter wheat on winter wheat since
For
1927. And I said, "You can't be getting very good production." "Oh, no, we all have full-time jobs. It's just a hobby. We could never make a living at it." And I'm thinking, boy, that's tradition's getting in the way of something there.
Wow. That's quite the story. So diving a little bit into the regenerative journey that you've taken, what does that mean to you? What does regenerative agriculture mean to you?
Well, I really like the definition we've settled on. The definition of regenerative agriculture in our mind is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, beginning with all life in the soil, moving to all life above the soil. And that's what it's about. We need to think of our farms, our ranches as an ecosystem. In his book, One Straw Revolution, Masanobu Fukuoka said that an object seen in isolation from the whole is not the real thing. So think about that. And then you think about how most of the research is done today in small plots, in a greenhouse, very, very specific. It's not the real thing. We have to take our whole ecosystem into context. And I think that is one of the most rewarding parts of regenerative ag, is that you see the life returning to your farm or ranch. And, it's not just the crop you're growing or the species of livestock you're raising. It's about all the insects and birds and forbs and flowers. And, it just epitomizes life. And it's much more enjoyable working with life than death.
That's right. Now, with that, looking at the whole ecosystem, does that mean that true regenerative agriculture cannot be done without livestock?
I often get asked that. Here's my answer to that question. Realize we consult for a lot of straight grain farmers who have no desire to get livestock. And that's fine. I tell them you can significantly advance the soils on your cropland without livestock. However, make no mistake about it, they'll never advance as far as they could if you were to add livestock. And we've seen that play out over and over again. Ecosystems just do not function to their fullest potential without animals and insects.
On your personal farm that you and your son have there in North Dakota, you've been doing regenerative practices for quite some time. What are some of the big differences that you've seen today versus what you used to experience when you farmed conventionally?
The biggest difference is by far more profit, okay, and better resilience. Those are by far the biggest differences. That and life. The amount of life on our ranch, last week I was in New York giving a TED talk, and it just so happens that we had a bird survey returned to us the week before. When they were out last summer there, just in a matter of hours, they documented 105 nesting species of birds on our ranch. Well, I tell you what, back in the late 80s, early 90s, before I went down the regenerative path, we would have been lucky to count 10. And I tell people we easily have 10 to 20 times as much wildlife, easily 100 times more insects, way more plant species diversity. It's just so much more life. And that life builds resiliency into the soil. We have earthworms and all these microorganisms in the soil. We have way better water infiltration. We've gone from a half of an inch per hour to now scientists documented 32 inches per hour we can infiltrate, which Bismarck, North Dakota has never received 30 inches in a year, let alone in an hour. So any rain that falls, we're going to infiltrate unless it falls on the road or some cement driveway, I guess. But, you notice those things. The other thing is a lot of us who were in the conventional mindset can relate just to the stress, the financial stress in agriculture. And agriculture has one of the highest suicide rates of any occupation anywhere in the world. Well, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren at Geis's Foundation, they did a survey and they've documented that regenerative farms and ranches, 76% greater profitability. And you can tell that when I go out and work with a farm family that's been going down this path for a while, they just have a different outlook on life. It's positive. The stress is being relieved because profitability is increasing. That makes it a very, very enjoyable career.
So here's a question for you, maybe a bit controversial. So I've been at several farms that have gone down the regenerative agriculture path, and you can see, and the ones that I'm speaking of right now, they're all older. They're closer to the end of their career than the beginning, and they were extremely excited and passionate about it. And the thought that I had run through my head after seeing this several times is it the regenerative practices that are changing the profitability of the farm, or is it the people getting excited about their farm and their business is capable of and getting excitement back in their career that propels them to be financially better off and be better farmers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it's one and the same because it feeds off each other. A friend of mine, Shane New, one of our consultants, said, you have to become intentional. You have to make up your mind. He tells his own story, how he thought he was regenerative until he really got studying the 634. Then he started becoming very intentional and applying those, and his farm just exploded in life and profitability increased. So I think it takes some of both. You have to start seeing it, but the more you do, then the more you're going to see. And I tell people, because I hear it over and over again, almost on a daily basis, Gabe, you don't understand, my soils aren't like that. And I tell them all, I know exactly what your problem is. Go into the bathroom, look in the mirror, there's your problem. That's your problem. Your farm, your ranch is a direct reflection of you. Yes, things happen, hailstorms like I know about, drought like I know about. But you know what? Nowadays, we just went through 3 of the driest years ever recorded here in Bismarck. 2020, 2021, 2022. We had 6.2, 5.6, 6.6 inches of precip total for the year. We still grew a crop each of those years. Okay. Our neighbors only grew 1 out of 3 years crop. Okay. Why? Because we built a resiliency into our soils. Why did we build that resiliency? Because we became intentional. We understood. We knew that our farm, our ranch was a direct reflection of us and our actions. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I really think you have to have the right mindset to successfully go down this path.
Yeah, and some of the things that are demonstrated through regenerative practices, I've seen when your partner Alan was at my farm doing a class here, we had the soil demonstration set up with water infiltration, right? And I had never seen that before. And we had gone out that morning and picked soils from conventionally tilled, highly tilled, no-till pasture, and permanent pasture, and rotational pasture, and woodland. So we had quite a variety. And that was probably one of the biggest eye-opening demonstrations that I saw, because I know those soils, they're in my area. It's not stuff that he took in from outside. And I saw with my own eyes what the difference in water infiltration was on those different type of management practices, because it's all the same soil. It's all right within, I could see all those spots where we pulled those samples from my office where I'm sitting right now. That was a real eye opener for somebody like myself, who's I wouldn't say a skeptic, but very want to understand things very well before I dive in. And that really opened my eyes to some of the resiliency that you're speaking about.
Yeah. And, one of our other partners, Ray Archuleta, is very, very well known for doing those soil health demos. And more people have probably had their eyes open because of them than anything else. That's what our consultants often use when they go out on a new client's farm or ranch. They'll just take an infiltration ring, go out into their field, drive it down, go over into the section line or the road ditch, drive it down, look at the difference. The only difference is management, or stewardship, as I like to call it.
This is probably not a very light question, but I'm curious to get your take on it. What do you believe the current system of global monocrops, so corn, soybeans, wheat, and rice, does that need to change? And how do we do that if it does?
I believe it absolutely needs to change. The reason is we're degrading the resource, and many will argue that point. Oh, we're not degrading it. I tell people I've been on hundreds of farms and ranches all over the world. I've never, ever stood on a single one, including my own, that's not degraded. We're all trying to farm and ranch degraded resources. Some of them are more degraded than others. The current model doesn't make sense for a lot of different reasons, okay? We often get challenged with how are we going to feed the world? We're at over 8 billion people. How are we going to feed 9 or 10 billion? Okay. Well, a very small percentage of the land today is used for human food consumption. A lot of it is used to grow grain, to fuel ethanol plants, etc. A lot of it's used to grow grain, to feed the livestock that shouldn't be fed grain, etc. We need to change the model for many, many reasons. The biggest reason, I believe, though, is because of human health. And if you really study the trends in human health, it is declining, by the decade significantly. ADD, ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, cancer, the rates are just skyrocketing. Okay, nobody can argue that the food we're growing today and consuming today is lower in nutrient density. We're doing some really, not we, scientists we work with are doing some really groundbreaking work on phytonutrient compounds. And it's these phytonutrient compounds that drive our gut microbiome. What they're finding is these phytonutrient compounds are directly related to the diversity of the biology in the soil, which is directly related to the diversity above ground. So if we're going to heal human health, if we're going to heal ecological health, we have to change the model to one that's much more regenerative and much more diverse in terms of biodiversity. That'll bring about, it'll actually reverse climate change. I'm not a fan of the words climate change. I prefer to call it like it is. It's degradation caused by mankind, not all caused by agriculture, certainly not caused by grazing ruminants out on the landscape. We can argue that ruminants in confinement, there is issues there, but I tell people all the time, if you want to degrade the landscape even further, remove the animals from them. It'll degrade even further, okay? It's not the cow, it's the how. We need to get that point across. But we really need to understand that what needs to change is the consumer's mind, because consumers gave us this current production model we're in. After World War II, they wanted copious amounts of cheap food. Well, I contend today they have copious amounts of cheap food-like substances. I think much of what's consumed today we cannot even call food, okay? So it's up to the consumer to be educated, vote with their buying dollar, and vote by purchasing regeneratively grown and raised products. Get to know your farmer and rancher, reward the ones that are doing good work by buying from them. And what that will cause, that'll cause massive change in the way we farm and ranch.
So how did we get to the point, I know you had mentioned consumers wanted cheap food, but how do we get to the point at the over the last 100 years where it really boiled down to 4 commodities?
Yeah, and that part of it come about from the Federal Farm Program, USDA. You know, what a ridiculous system we have right now where revenue insurance, crop insurance, okay, based solely on yield, nothing on nutrient density, nothing on diversity of product, and then the price for that revenue insurance is based off the previous year's commodity prices. All that does is ensure low commodity prices, with the exception of some worldwide global disaster, either in the form of drought, war in the Ukraine, etc. Okay, other than that, it's forcing low commodity prices. And what that then has driven is farms to be highly leveraged. And so most farmers today have to borrow large amounts of capital in order to purchase the inputs. Okay, they do. Why? To produce more yield. Why? To drive the price even lower. Okay, it just is a flawed, ridiculous system. And because of it, the majority of farmers and ranchers, many aren't going to want to hear this, and they refuse to believe it, but they're really welfare recipients. They're living on government the subsidies that is the current farm program. And I take shots all the time from people who get very mad at me for saying that. But I don't care. I'm proud to say that we haven't taken a subsidy on our ranch for over a decade. My son, who's 37, has never, ever taken $1 of government subsidies. Even the COVID payments he handed back. Why? Because he's profitable without it. Okay? And I have a real problem when I'm sitting there asking my city cousins to subsidize my business. We're not subsidizing Ma and Pa's restaurant on Main Street, are we? Okay, then why should they subsidize my farm or ranch? Okay, if I'm not a good enough business person, I shouldn't be in business, plain and simple. There, I said a mouthful there. I'm going to get in trouble for that.
I'm sure nobody's face got red in that one, right?
Well, when you get my age, you're entitled. You're allowed to say things.
You can speak your mind a little more.
Yeah.
So another thing that we have in common, other than that you have a son with the same name as I am and we're the same age, your son and I are the same age, we both also did not grow up on a farm. For me, that kind of instilled a passion to help others that didn't come from agriculture to grow up in agriculture and make it a career. Is that kind of where your passion? I know you're very passionate about teaching other people, and your stories that you talked about in your book, Dirt to Soil, portray some of the stories of you bringing on people that were from outside of your family, not from agricultural backgrounds. You want to talk a little bit about that aspect of your career and passion?
So I mentioned that when I was in high school, I started working on farms. One of the first farms I worked on the bulletin board at the local vocational technical center was an ad, wanted summer help. So it was a dairy farm 60 miles away from where we live here. I was the only applicant they got. And you can tell how desperate they were. They hired me with no farm experience. I was in heaven. I was up at 3:30 every morning, out to the barn, first one out there. I could not have learned more, enjoyed more. And I ended up working on that farm for 3 summers because I was so passionate and enjoyed it. And I want other youth to experience that. Because of that, my wife and I had an internship on our farm for nearly 25 years where we brought in several interns each summer. The vast majority of them had no farm or ranch experience. As a matter of fact, one of those interns was from LA and she ended up marrying my son. So I didn't know we were also providing a dating service, but that's okay. It worked out great. She's wonderful. But I believe so much that the next generation of great agricultural leaders don't have to come from a farm or ranch. What they have to have is an open mind and a desire to learn. And it's because of that Alan Williams and myself founded a scholarship fund, Future Leaders in Regenerative Agriculture. And we give out scholarships to young people who want to move down the regenerative path. Now, these scholarships can be for college, they can be for an internship program, they can be to attend a Soil Health Academy or some other event that educates them as to regenerative agriculture. And I think it's up to those of us who have been rewarded with the good fortunes provided by regenerative agriculture that we help the next generation so they're able to take over and take it further than we ever did.
So along those lines, getting people involved in agriculture from outside of it, do you see regenerative agriculture and the models that you've made on your family farm viable ways for young people to get into owning their own farm versus the conventional farming practices?
Yeah, you often hear today how, young people can't get started in agriculture. I call BS to that. And here's why. When we had our internship program, young people come, I want to own my own farm or ranch. And I said, why would you want to put yourself in debt like that? And so we took the internship program very, very seriously in that we were trying to teach them constantly during the 5 to 6 months they were with us. I was trying to instill on them that they can farm or ranch. And so what we would teach them is you start small with small project and you grow as your profits grow. Don't go borrow a lot of money. One of the big mistakes a lot of young people or those getting into production agriculture make is they borrow a lot of money to buy a piece of land. Then they're just trying to fight their way out of debt, paying interest, etc. If you start small and grow as your profits grow, man, you can accelerate much, much faster. Also, I contend that if you, like me, if you didn't grow up on a farm or ranch, you don't know yet where for sure what you want to do. You don't know for sure what enterprises you want to have. You don't know even large part what location you need to be in. So if you start out with these smaller enterprises and grow as your profits grow, the right opportunities will come along. Then you'll have the equity needed and the knowledge needed to make sound decisions.
On your operation, if I remember correctly from your book, you actually started several enterprises that you originally weren't in to kind of give the interns something to do, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually a lot of them got taken over or went their own direction in that enterprise. Was that right?
Yeah. So I'll never forget, my son Paul was off at the university and he called me one evening and I was out combining late at night. We were talking and he says, Dad, you always preach diversity, but the only livestock we have is beef cattle. Well, I want to get some chickens and some hogs and some sheep. What could I say? The only thing I could say was have at it. And so Paul's the one who actually started into many of these other enterprises. And then what we offered our interns, if they so chose, was the chance to, we would provide them like with several ewes or some laying hens or a bred sow, or offer them a chance to get started, to give them a foot up, so to speak, a leg up, and let them grow their own enterprise. And it worked out really well.
Yeah, that's great. What drives you to continue to push? I mean, you before we started recording here, you talked about your grueling schedule for the day already. What keeps you going at that pace today?
Yeah, I'm on the road over 280 days a year.
Sounds more grueling than farming.
Yeah, it's something. But what keeps me going more than anything else is when I get that phone call, someone thanking me. I'll share this story. So just here in March, I had a guy who I've been kind of helping, talking to the last 4+ years, mentoring, so to speak, here in North Dakota. And he asked if he could stop by and see me because he was going to be in Bismarck. And he stopped by and realized this is a guy farms approximately 5,000 acres, all was rented land, and contacted me in 2018 after that year, wanted to go down the regenerative path because he was tired of beating his head against the wall. He said, I'm working, and all the money just goes to pay the bank. Well, he stopped by to tell me how that's changed. Now today, he's cut his input costs over 50%, and his profitability has increased so much that just this past winter, he went and paid cash for half a section of land. Cash, okay? And he stopped to thank me. So what keeps me going is stories like that, And then he also told me that his 2 children who are entering high school age, all they talk about is coming back to the farm. And that's what's needed in agriculture today. Provide the hope for others and help them in any way we can to show them that this is a viable occupation.
Yeah, so often you hear about hopelessness and people shouldn't go into agriculture and you can't get into agriculture. And it's great to hear stories like that and to see examples of people that have been able to buck the trend. And a lot of it's because of just having the right information.
That's right. Yeah. Again, you cannot implement what you don't know. So it's education. The greatest compaction on any farm or ranch is found right between our ears.
What's the biggest thing that you've seen in all your travels that farmers, the thing that farmers didn't know that they didn't know the most?
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that it's hard for most farmers to believe, but when we go out on a new farm or ranch, we take a suite of soil tests that look at the biological component of the soil. And then we take one test called a TND test, total nutrient digestion. That's taken 0 to 12 inches deep. And we have never, ever tested a single acre of land on the 34 million acres we've tested that does not have adequate nutrients for profitable crop production. So our whole point is showing those farmers, look, here's the test. You've got plenty of nutrients. Nutrients aren't lacking. Then we teach them that 97% of what a plant needs for growth is found in the atmosphere. There's 32,000 tons of atmospheric nitrogen above every surface acre of earth. Why any farmer would write a check for nitrogen is beyond me, okay? All we have to do is provide the diversity and the biology in the soil to make those nutrients available. And once we do that, educate farmers, they're going, wow, this. Now, I'm not saying that every farmer will eliminate 100% of their fertility needs or herbicide needs, but they can certainly eliminate a great percentage of it. And to me, that's what really is the aha moment for them. And they're like, wow, this can be profitable.
Where do you see agriculture in the next 5 to 10 years in your mind?
Yeah, and Alan Williams and I talked about this and several others. We have seen more change the past 3 to 5 years than we did the previous 25 combined. You know, you can't go anywhere now without people talking about regenerative agriculture. I spend the majority of my time now talking to CEOs, board of directors, heads of sustainability of companies and brands who want to source regeneratively grown and raised products. I think that's exciting because farmers and ranchers are finally going to get paid for all of these ecosystem services they're providing, the hard work they're doing, the nutrient-dense food they're providing. And we can finally then get to the point where we can start once again using food as preventative medicine.
Do you see that that premium that farmers get for those type of products going out, just kind of like you see with other commodities like RBST free milk? We had that premium for 2 years and then it was gone. What's your thought on that?
Here's my thought on that. And I get sometimes people chastise my son or me, man, but your products are so costly. Well, why are they costly? It's called supply and demand. Gabe's a capitalist, okay? What they don't realize is I can produce those products much lower price point than the conventional model. You know, long term, I can prove that I can produce a bushel of corn for around $1.45 a bushel. All costs, even land costs included. Okay, how many farmers in the Corn Belt can do that, right? Okay, so I don't care if that price premium erodes. I'm such a least cost producer working with nature, I'm going to be profitable regardless. So what I tell people is, just better get your butt in gear and get down this path so you can join me.
You're always learning like I am, and I think that's very important. So I want to know what Gabe Brown is learning about right now. What's on your nightstand that you're reading? What's the big thing that you're trying to figure out right now?
Yeah, the big push for me is what I mentioned earlier. It's that how diversity drives diversity of soil biology, drives the diversity of these phytochemical compounds in plants. And then that's what carries through to the grain, the fruit, the vegetable, or the protein that we consume. So I'm coming at it more from the standpoint of, okay, so my stewardship above ground is directly related to the nutrient density of that food that I'm producing. To me, that is whole uncharted territory. And when I look at the human health crisis that we have all around the world, I believe that's the answer. And that's the answer to farmers being paid truly for what they're doing. If if science can start quantifying and measuring those phytochemical compounds, okay, that can only arrive in our food via that biology, boy, think of that if you, in your case, Paul milk and it's tested. Gee, Paul's is so much higher in these phytochemical compounds. It's worth so much more as preventative medicine. This tomato is worth more. This wheat is worth more. This corn's worth more. Then farmers will be paid accordingly. That'll drive meaningful change on the landscape.
Yeah, that's great. What are some of the other resources that have been really impactful to you in the past?
The more I know I don't know. And one of the things that I enjoy the most about regenerative ag is that I can pick up the phone and call almost any country in the world and talk to somebody in the regenerative ag space, and they're willing to share. And so the greatest resource I think out there is other human minds. You know, I talk to farmers, ranchers, scientists, it's just, there's so much knowledge that's not being shared that we need to learn and share. I think that's a fantastic resource.
Great. Awesome. Well, Gabe Brown, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate being on the AgCulture Podcast.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure being with you.
Once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the AgCulture Podcast. I hope you enjoyed that interview that I did with Gabe Brown about a year ago. One thing that I wanted to say before we finish off here is that if you know somebody that would be an interesting person to have on the podcast that has an interesting entrepreneurial story in agriculture or interesting viewpoints or from an interesting sector that might not be mainstream in agriculture, please reach out to us, whether that be on our social media platforms or our website, and pass those names along, contact information. If you could give us an introduction, I really appreciate it. I love being able to showcase great stories on this podcast of entrepreneurs around the world in agriculture. And as always, if you would be so kind as to share this episode with somebody that you know, we would appreciate that as well. Thanks again for listening to the AgCulture Podcast. We'll see you next week.